Hello, and welcome back to the Accedo Playback Podcast, the podcast discussing industry news, trends, and tech advancements in the streaming and OTT industry. Today, we have a special episode for you. Recently, Michael Lantz, our CEO, was on the Faultline podcast speaking to Tommy Flanagan. If you're unaware, Tommy Flanagan is the editor of Faultline as well as the host of the Faultline podcast. Faultline and Tommy have been providing a sort of no-nonsense coverage of the media and entertainment industry for quite a while. During their conversation, Tommy and Michael reflect on the last 20 years of the entertainment industry, how the TV landscape has changed, before coming to a more modern discussion about where Accedo is currently around managed services, recommendations, and device fragmentation and innovation. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Here's the interview.
All right, hello and welcome to another episode of the Faultline podcast, the audio companion to the weekly publication analysing disruptive trends in the media and entertainment ecosystem. My name's Tommy Flanagan, I'm the editor of Faultline and your podcast host. In this episode, we will be attempting to scratch below the surface of a serious Swedish C-suite, someone who has nourished an unassuming acorn of app development into a towering tree of the TV industry, but not without plenty of resistance along the way, including from us. Please welcome someone who is possibly my second favourite Swede after Henrik Larsson. It's Michael Lantz, CEO at Accedo. How are you today, Michael?
I'm fine, thanks. Despite the reference to me as an acorn, or the company as an acorn. Happy to be here.
Was an acorn. We'll come on to that shortly. But and I don't know if the timing of this podcast cameo is deliberate, Michael, but Accedo has just celebrated its 20th birthday. So this is a nice way to celebrate. So congratulations on surviving the many waves of consolidation this far. But before you founded Accedo in 2004, this is a strange place to start, but I wanted to, go pre-Accedo. Your first project manager role was in a very different realm, in using neural networks, machine learning, and deep tech image recognition to analyze blood samples to support diagnosis of diseases like leukemia, which is not what I expected from stalking your employment history. But weirdly, this is a similar career path to my own, from studying biomedical science to working in media and entertainment. I landed here by pure accident, but before we dive into the Accedo side of things, I'm just curious to know how you ended up segueing from blood samples to TV software.
I didn't expect that, but well, thanks for asking, Tommy. I started that company right after university, and the background was that I was majoring in applied mathematics and image recognition and similar things, and there was this startup company very close to the university, and I cut my teeth both in terms of sort of doing various roles. I was employee number 8 in that company, I believe. And I cut my teeth on sort of running, the project management and software development at a very, very small company. And also cut my teeth on the entrepreneurial journey, if you will. So I learned a lot over those couple of years when I was there. But then I felt that, my calling was really on the business side. That's when I decided to transition away from sort of software development, if you will, to more sort of business leadership, not leadership as much at that point in time. I was 25, but starting that journey, and I moved into management consultancy, a completely different pivot from sort of the previous sort of more hands-on software development experience.
All right. Okay. Yes. Sorry for our listeners who are expecting us to jump in, but I just wanted to get that out of the way. We always like to do a bit of background on the Faultline podcast. So, the acorn analogy that I used in the opening gambit, that was very deliberate because, as I said, we like to start the podcast with a bit of history. So trawling back through our extensive archive of 20 plus years of industry articles and analysis to pinpoint when our guest first appeared on the pages of Faultline. And your debut, Michael, came in January 2012, maybe a little bit later than you expected. January 2012, when our founder and my editorial predecessor, Peter White, penned the headline, Accedo grows from small acorn to one-stop shop on TV apps, which is actually a fairly friendly headline by his standards. But he quickly compensates for that with the very first line of the story, which reads, "When Faultline first met Michael Lantz, the founder of Accedo, it was at a conference in Europe in 2004. And he was one of those unbearable Swedish entrepreneurs who kept banging on about TV interactivity like it meant something." So, Michael, do you remember this meeting with my late boss 20 years ago, and was the feeling mutual?
I do remember meeting Peter, and I always enjoy the conversations. And of course, as you know, Peter was a sort of born skeptic, and I'm sure he sort of challenged many executives in the industry, and he did challenge me as well. But he always came from sort of a place of logic, even if I didn't agree with his logic. I remember us having this conversation. You always, one of my sort of go-to comments about sort of industry development, you always overestimate the development in the short run and you underestimate it in the long run. And I tried to argue with Peter that maybe interactivity won't be here now or maybe next year, but at some point the TV experience as we know it will fundamentally change. And if we are there will be business for us at some point. And I think he sort of understood it, even though he sort of tended to be argumentative because he enjoyed that, I believe.
It gets nicer because Peter goes on to write, 150 TV projects later, and with the onset of smart and connected TVs, Lantz comes over as a far more sophisticated visionary, someone who has taken the knocks of having people like us question his vision and been found to be right, as apps on TVs provide everything he was talking about years ago, with the added difference that he has had 7 extra years to refine his vision. So, those kind words must make up for the initial knockdown as being an unbearable Swedish entrepreneur.
Well, I really appreciated Peter's nudge in the right direction those early years. And I think you always learn by having these discussions with people in the industry. And I did speak to Peter many times before we were actually featured there. And I think, those were great learnings for me. I
think, those 2 opening paragraphs are a great kind of metaphor for Faultline. We will scratch below the surface and find out what's going on, and we may upset people along the way, but ultimately we will get to the truth eventually. So at the time, Michael, in 2012, which was the year you acquired the US app developer Cloverleaf, you were talking about the vision being to create a TV app ecosystem so that pay TV operators could incorporate off-the-shelf apps, and you had just come up with the core development framework, and that was serving as a sort of translation engine for developers to port apps and then link up all the ingredients like app management and usage analytics, etc. But you were looking beyond, simply writing interactive apps and selling them to operators, because, nothing works straight off the shelf, right? So it was more about giving operators a head start at the time. So now, 12 years later, I'm curious, how would you say your vision has changed?
So one of the major shifts have been in terms of the market, sort of who's controlling the market. And 20 years ago, the operators were the king makers in the market. So a lot of our efforts went to how do we create tools and platforms for operators to thrive in this ecosystem. It felt like that was the right way to go. And then media companies would then come in and sort of work on those various tools and platforms. But ultimately, it would be the operators that would continue to be the gatekeepers. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look around and see that the operators are no longer the kingmakers of 20 years ago. And I think around the time of that interview, 2012, we started to realize that, what is now called over-the-top video, media companies going directly to consumers, will be a thing. Netflix had gone international a year or 2 before. Prior to that, they were still working with licensed content primarily in the US. Now they have original content. They went international. It was clear that this was going to be a thing, and you had all of these local broadcasters and local and regional video demand providers going directly to consumers and not necessarily leveraging the operator platforms. So at that time, we were sort of going two directions. First, we wanted to help the operators defend their position. That was what I spoke to Peter about in that case. And secondly, we were also accelerating sort of on our professional services arm with developing and delivering the media applications to bring them out to the market. And early customers of ours were HBO and the NBA and so on. Their first forays into sort of TV applications over the top were done in that sort of time frame. And now 10 years or 12 years later, it's clear that if anything, the media companies have captured more of the consumer's attention, and the operators are very, very challenged in terms of their business model. How do they even keep the current revenues going forward? What is their relevance for consumers? And I think it's, from our perspective, it didn't really matter that much who would winning, because we hedged our bets, if you will. But that sort of original approach with sort of helping the operators with platforms and tools is obviously not as relevant today as it was 12 years ago.
What percentage of business today, roughly, are you getting from traditional pay TV operators?
So it's probably about 30% of our business comes from operators, and 70% of the business comes from media and sort of adjacent vertical sports and similar verticals to media.
Interesting. Okay, because at the time, in 2012, you told us it was around 50% from pay TV operators. Yeah. So 12 years, 20%. That's not a massive change.
No, but I think one of the differences is what we're doing for operators. So back in 2012, it was very much sort of the pay TV platforms, the closed platforms that you had at the time. Now it's very much on the OTT side of the operators. They would need to do things on retail devices, whether those are mobile devices or consumer electronics devices. Back in 2012, it was almost exclusively on their set-top box devices. That was sort of the key focus for the operators at the time. So the things that we're doing for the operators have changed, and now the things that we're doing on the actual set-top boxes is probably, I would assume, it's 10% of our global revenues or so.
Okay. And what was that roughly in 2012, would you say?
I would say that almost everything we did for operators back in 2012 was related to the set-top boxes.
Wow, okay. Yeah, that's a massive shift. All right. Okay, so moving on from, these historic headlines from Peter to a more recent one of my own, which, in anticipation of this recording, it was maybe deliberately facetious, but I don't know if you saw this headline, Michael, but 2 weeks ago, we published one that wrote, with every new move, Accedo looks more like an Accenture. And the reason I did this was because back at IBC 2022, I quizzed some of your team about whether Accedo was getting, so bloated with the transition from products to SaaS to managed services and advisory services that it was inevitable that you would, sprout these consultancy revenue streams. And by the way, this was way before you officially released your OTT video managed services offering, which was 2 months ago, March this year. And I remember the offended faces at the Accedo stand when I mentioned the name Accenture. Of course, you weren't there, but your colleagues were not happy about that reference. So almost 2 years later, I wonder how has that changed and how that headline sits with you today.
Well, thanks for that question. And if I had been there to talk to you about 2 years ago, I would have embraced that comparison. Not necessarily because we want to become Accenture, but because I really think that one of the key aspects of Accedo is customer centricity. So we need to listen to the market to understand what they actually need. And I think that is something that we have in common with someone like Accenture. We need to follow the trends in the market. We need to be there and deliver what the customer needs. And I think the response to the customer's needs have, from our side, been this managed service offering, which is something that has evolved. 12 years ago, customers did not want a managed services offering. They want selected expertise, but were trying to do everything themselves. But now, many realize that the technology is becoming increasingly commoditized. There is no strategic reason for them to actually build up the competence in-house. They would like to have a long-term partner instead to work with. And I think if they have those requirements, but still don't want to buy an off-the-shelf product, that's a clear use case for us to deliver a managed service to the customer. They can be sort of the requirements owner, the product owner, but we can be their delivery arm to do that. And I think that's a logical development, but it comes from a sense of trying to deliver value to the customer based on what we believe they need. And I think that's something that we share with someone like Accenture or any large services organization for that matter.
I think that's the difference from asking that question to, an entrepreneur and a business person to, speaking to product managers or, software developers. Of course, making a comparison to a company that makes $64 billion a year in revenue is going to put a smile on your face. But from people who are, product people and software people, it's maybe a bitter pill to swallow, possibly. But, the managed services landscape is not without risks. As I'm sure you're aware, there's a huge responsibility in managing those services on behalf of customers. It also means, you have to retrain entire teams on the art of managing a full video service. But one of the benefits of managed services is that it enables more predictable recurring revenues, right? Which is reassuring for shareholders. So how is that risk reward balance panning out at this stage? I know it's only been 2 months since you officially launched it, but am I right in saying that you've been kind of unofficially doing managed services for a few years?
Yeah, that's right. So, and we're not the only company doing this, right? So customers would like a long-term partner, and they increasingly put requirements on their partners, whether that is more of a product-centric company or more of a service-centric company. It's the same thing. They want to have a reliable long-term partner, which is effectively what a managed service is. Now, the difference in my mind, and this is something we're embracing with this sort of official release, is that we obviously need to take more of a business ownership, right? We need to help the customer succeed. If they don't have that same in-house competence as they would have had 10 years ago, we would need to be there and advise them. Sort of what is the best way of running a video service? What are the pricing strategies for this market? How would you design your user interface to make this to fulfill the requirements you would have for this service? And I think that ownership, that sort of more proactive way of running a video service is something I think we are good at, and I think we haven't been as good at telling that story to the market. And I think we will embrace that narrative going forward. We will explain sort of this is what we have been doing with many customers over the years, and now I think we are sort of better off actually taking the full responsibility rather than what has historically been a strong area, which is the applications effectively. The benefit for us with coming from the application side is that we intuitively understand the consumers. And I think that's a good starting point. We can bring in the components that we don't have in our tech stack, working with various partners. And since we understand the consumers and how this service is viewed from a consumer point of view, we can design something which is attractive both from a consumer point of view, but also from a cost-benefit perspective.
And are you at liberty to name any customer names yet on the managed services side?
So if you mean sort of traditional managed services, that is fairly new to us. So traditionally managed services would be sort of a very long-term, multi-year engagement with sort of high responsibility levels and so on. We're not at liberty to disclose the relatively few customers we have in that area, but we will go live with the first ones this year. There is always a transition project to what they already have to something new, so we will get back to you on that. But on the sort of almost managed services, we obviously have previously communicated many customer brands where we have been working with them for 10 years, right, in a sort of a similar capacity. And examples of that is, for example, Deutsche Telekom in Germany, which we have worked with for a long time. We have Tata Play in India, which we worked with for a long time, running parts of their technology stack for their TV offering. So there are certainly examples where we're working in a similar capacity, but not sort of in a sort of what is traditionally meant as a full managed service. We don't have responsibility for the video distribution in either of those cases, for example, whereas in a true end-to-end managed service, we would also own the video distribution itself.
Okay, sure. So what's the sort of roadmap? Do you see managed services becoming the lion's share of your revenues in the long term? Can you give us a sort of insight into the strategic roadmap?
I can. So first of all, I think I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, that one of the key elements of Accedo is customer centricity. And we don't believe managed services is for everyone. I think there are some customers who, for various reasons, would like to continue to build and own the solution themselves for strategic reasons, for competence reasons, because they have such a unique experience that it doesn't work well with a managed service. And in those cases, we would work with them as we've always done, right? On a case-by-case basis, maybe a point solution or maybe sort of specific platforms and so on. But others are sort of realizing that they would like to focus on the most important things, which would be consumer relationships and the content packaging and so on, and would like to have a strong strategic partner. So we will continue to have both ways of working. Realistically, I think in a 3-4 year perspective, maybe half of Accedo would be managed services and the rest would be sort of the other, more traditional way of working. So it's not going to be a quick switch, but certainly we are expanding the managed services as a percentage of our overall business.
Okay, and it'll be interesting now to see if rivals react and launch their own, dedicated OTT video managed services kind of sites, because the argument from them is that they've been doing it for years, but not officially.
Yeah, well, they sort of have. I think they have in the same way as we have, but I think very few have been doing. I mean, the big ones, right? The MediaKind, Cinemedia, and so on have been doing. Nagra have been doing managed services for years, right? But they come from a sort of different place in the market from a size perspective and a sort of how long they've been in the market, obviously. But our traditional competitors, they have obviously been doing managed services in the same way we have been doing managed services, but it's not a traditional sort of multi-year engagement where you take full ownership of a service, which would require some sort of risks, as you pointed out earlier, but also responsibilities in terms of driving the business forward in a more strategic way.
Okay, so moving on from managed services, I know we could talk about this all day, but there are other things to touch on. It recently came to my attention that Accedo is an investor in Jump, which for our listeners is a Madrid-based company specializing in analyzing user behavior to drive monetization and user engagement. And you are chairman of the board at Jump, I understand. And you probably get asked this a lot, but it's something that I've not had the opportunity to ask yet, which is straight up, why doesn't Accedo just acquire Jump? And in doing so, you would have personalization kind of at the core of what you do, which is something that a rival 24i has been able to say in its marketing after acquiring the filter last year or 2022, that it has, personalization at the heart, and its rivals kind of don't. That's the kind of marketing strapline from 24i, and it kind of looks more like a back-end company today than a front-end developer, I suppose. So yeah, is there any intent to fully acquire Jump down the line?
Well, you never know what's going to happen, but I think the question that you need to ask yourself in any acquisition is what's the rationale for doing an acquisition? Is there anything we can do if we own them outright that we cannot do if we're partners? So we're obviously saying exactly the same thing, that personalization is at our heart of what we do, and we obviously have a very strong partnership with this company, but we also work with other companies. So I think we can tell that narrative without actually owning them outright. I don't want to argue about sort of 24i's strategy in that area, but I don't think it's the owning is not a sales argument in my mind in the market. Now, obviously, there could be other reasons why you want to own something. You can realize synergies. You can create sort of a new products that wouldn't be possible otherwise. I mean, you can find a number of areas. But we believe that the reason why we invested in Jump is obviously that as part of our initiation of a partnership with Jump back 4 years ago, I believe, pre-pandemic, 5 years ago, it was sort of important for us to be able to influence Jump's roadmap, to be able for them to prioritize integration with our platforms and so on. And I think that was sort of a underlying argument why we want to do that. And at the same time, as we solidify that partnership with sort of a joint go-to-market, we took a minority stake in Jump at that point in time. And I think we have added value to them, and I think they have added value to us. So from that perspective, it's been a healthy partnership, but we don't necessarily need to acquire them to achieve anything else. I think long term, obviously, it may be better for us as shareholders for them to exit somewhere else. So maybe they want to retain the capabilities of raising money from a venture capital company at some point when the market is improving. I think this offers us, both us and Jump, the possibility of being flexible going forward.
Okay, well, to play devil's advocate, I might argue, I'm sure you're going to disagree with me, but you have built out this partner ecosystem, where customers can pick and choose additional tools like analytics and personalization from third-party vendors, which is great. But, would any acquisition into an area like personalization and analytics, would that jeopardize your partner relationships and therefore shrink the partner ecosystem if you were to acquire Jump?
Yes, I think that's an accurate. So I will actually agree with you, but there is obviously a but in my response here. So I would agree with you, but I don't think there is as much direct competition as you may think, right? Because every vendor in the market, I mean, recommendation engine, which Jump has, potentially can go head to head with others. But in terms of the insights capabilities of Jump, they are not sort of directly overlapping the insights capabilities from others, either because they focus on other segments. Maybe they are sort of more premium than Jump, that would be be from a scalability and feature perspective, or they may be sort of more sort of off-the-shelf open source type of solutions that Jump doesn't compete with. So I think in most cases the partner ecosystem could work itself out, that there is a suitable vendor for each choice in the market. So I'm not too concerned about it from the current situation that we're investors, so that would scare other partners away. But obviously there is a perception in the market as well. So if we were to acquire Jump, that may give a certain perception in the market. Now Accedo is abandoning the open marketplace, and maybe they will consolidate, 5 other components in the market. And that's not the intention. We are very focused on the open marketplace. And as I'm sure everyone in the market can attest to, we are sort of working with also with Jump's competitors. This may be important, Jump are also working with our competitors. That's not a problem for us, and we are not influencing Jump's go-to-market strategy in any way.
Okay, it's always kind of bittersweet when someone agrees with me. But I'm nitpicking slightly now. But so your partner ecosystem lists 12 vendors tagged under analytics, but just 3 vendors are tagged under personalization. So that's Jump, Amazon, and Iris TV. This is when I checked 2 weeks ago, by the way, which is not many at all. So are you deliberately limiting the number of personalization options with just 3 because of the vested interest in Jump? Because I find it strange that Think Analytics is there, but it's tagged under analytics, but not under personalization. So I think Analytics personalization capabilities not available through the partner ecosystem.
Yeah, this is probably a mistake. I'm
Okay.
100% sure they should be on the personalization as well. So if anyone from the Accedo partner team is listening to this, let's go ahead and add them into the other one. So we have a relationship with Think Analytics since a long time, also on the personalization side. So I don't necessarily think that's accurate on the website if that's the case. But maybe I can just say that on the recommendation engines, it is a tricky topic. We actually discussed at Accedo already 15 years ago whether we should create our own recommendation engines, because it's not that hard to create a okay recommendation engine. It's kind of very difficult to create an advanced recommendation engine. But the question is, how many customers, how many services out there actually need an advanced recommendation engine? Well, the ones that have tens of thousands of items, but many services don't really have that, right? So you can survive with something quite basic, and in that case, you can almost sort of build it yourself. So I think recommendation engines are a tricky topic. What is their role in the future? Maybe this will become more commoditized going forward. I'm not sure, but what I can say is that Jump is. As you may have seen, they're certainly investing in other areas for general discovery, where they are using AI as sort of a way to help consumers discover what they want, more than just a typical recommendation, but more of a personalized discovery. So sort of the traditional use case of just adding content items to a recommendation rail, other users liked blah blah blah, then I think that's something they are increasingly stepping away from.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the C word, because that's heavily commoditized space for sure. And I mean that's a great example of how I'm guilty of looking too deep into things, because I thought that was going to be a much more profound question than it turned out to be. It's just a mistake in the partner ecosystem. But there we go. That's great. So you've already alluded to this earlier, Michael. But a lot of vendors, including Accedo, are talking about the new media customers, and for you guys, I understand that involves winning new business in areas like OTT fitness and edutainment. But the reality of that is that vendors are having to secure a lot of new media clients to offset, say just one major operator customer. So can you give us an idea of what it is that the new media customers want, and how the customer relationships differ from operators?
This is a very big question. So I think there is nothing in Accedo that really ties us into sort of the media and operator ecosystems, except the fact that this is where we started out, and this is what we have been doing. This is where our brand has value, and so on. But fundamentally, since we are actually not distributing the video, we're always using partners for that. We can sort of more easily step into other verticals. And what we're always talking about in all of our strategy meetings is which verticals are suitable, right? Fitness was sort of something which was top of mind for us during the pandemic, but we can all see sort of many of these online fitness companies have been struggling over the past couple of years. We used to work with Peloton, but obviously that's a company which have been cutting costs very rapidly over the past couple of years. So maybe that's not the right vertical for us. What is then the right vertical? Is it the edutainment? Is it sort of corporate video or distribution of video inside of corporations for training and other things? There are many use cases where video is a component, but not the only component. Now, one of the technical strengths that we have is to make things work on many different devices, either low-end devices, big screen devices, different generations of devices, and we have a lot of tools and frameworks to make an application of any sort work on many different devices. So I think the use cases we are looking for, the new media verticals that we are looking for, are the ones that have that requirement for multi-device fragmentation. Could be from an international perspective. You have different, phones in different territories, different integration points, or it could be from a use case perspective. You want to target many different big screen devices or special devices. So from that perspective, I think we are seeing great opportunities where there is a device fragmentation. So if nothing else, we would certainly be all over immersive technologies, VR and XR and so on. That may not be video centric, but it will certainly have a device fragmentation, and there will certainly be an interest from the media ecosystem to do something for those devices. We're still a few years away from critical mass on the consumer side, but this was the discussion I remember having with Peter White back in 2007 when I was advocating for connected TVs as the sort of next big thing, which took a few years before it has had critical mass in the market.
Yeah, and we've had similar debates about, the VR and XR ecosystem that we've been deeply cynical of, and you guys, again, been very early into that. And how is that panning out in terms of customers? Is you alluded to it still being very, very early. So are you making any money from VR XR?
Yes, we're making money. Do we cover our costs?
Okay.
No, not yet. But so what we can see is very similar to what we had 15, 16, 17 years ago with connected TV devices, is that the device manufacturers, the platform owners, obviously have an incentive to drive this ecosystem. And they're very keen to explore innovation concepts. On the other side, on the ones that own the content, the services, they are keen to explore as well, but not commit. So they prefer to do things related to events, which tends to then be music events, tends to be sports, where you can experiment and see sort of what is the consumer interest, what is the uptake, what is the feedback from consumers, would they be willing to pay for this going forward, what is the willingness to pay. I think there is a lot of experimentation regarding that. And then, of course, everyone is trying to make some sort of analysis on sort of, what is the price point necessary to drive adoption. And I remember again from the connected TV world, there was this sort of, if you can buy a screen for this price, why would you pay 50% more to get it connected, blah, 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 blah. And I think we will see those discussions here as well. Is the price point $1,000 for Apple Vision Pro 3 to be attractive on the market? Is it $500? I don't know, but I think we will just need to keep our ears to the ground and try to figure this out. In the meantime, we are learning as much as possible, and again, it's a fragmented market, which suits us very well. We have a cross-platform framework for a cost-efficient delivery of XR applications on all these devices, which suits everyone very well if they want to experiment for a reasonably low cost. So stay with us for another year or two, and we'll see how the market evolves.
Okay, as long as they figure out a way to stop vertigo and sickness, then we might be getting somewhere. But I wanted to touch on a more recent acquisition. I couldn't get you here without talking about Easel TV, which is a tiny 10-person development team that you acquired recently, based just down the road from me here in the west of England. And they bring a kind of radically simplified CMS dashboard and templated front-end apps. Talking about using AI and automation tools, primarily targeted, as I understand it, kind of the new media customers, as we mentioned, and that sort of low-hanging fruit, I suppose. So, and when I spoke to you and Joe, the CEO of Easel TV, who is now, what's Joe doing? What's his job title now for you guys?
He's Director of Business Development for our products.
Director of Business Development. Okay. So when I spoke to you guys, you're throwing all these buzzwords at me, AI and automation and efficiencies, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of, where these are coming from, and these massive cost savings that you're going to make, and how when Easel TV implemented this new framework, of course it meant that it was so much more efficient that they cut the development team. And I was saying to you, well, surely that's just going to translate over to Accedo. How can you make all of these efficiencies and claims without cutting the development team? Surely these cuts have to come from somewhere. If they're not coming from people, where are they coming from? So again, a very big question, but can you dive into that for us, please, Michael?
I can. So obviously we are adopting AI in our work just as everyone else. We're not planning to cut any people, but hopefully we'll get more output for the same amounts of people. So that's the general intention. Whether or not we can improve efficiency with 5%, 20%, 50%, I don't know yet. It's still very, very early stage. I do think, though, that for a small company like Easel TV, it was essential for them to have a narrative that differentiated them. So I think they would overplay. Sorry, Joe. They would overplay sort of the use of AI to sort of stand out from the crowd. Whereas Accedo, even if we are using AI to the same extent as Easel TV, I think our way of marketing ourselves would be from a reliability, scalability, feature richness perspective, which we would be credible in doing. So I don't think necessarily we will change to just use, the AI-powered platform. That's why you should use us. Seems a bit gimmicky to me. And I'm sure if you speak to all of our competitors, they would in all likelihood say exactly the same thing. Well, they have been working with AI for several years. So I think there is a general interest in the industry, and I think among us and our competitors, we are certainly embracing AI as a way to improve efficiencies.
Okay, so where is it at the moment that the average Accedo customer is using AI, and what sort of elements? At NAB, I was expecting AI to be a bit more in your face than it was. Of course, it was everywhere, but to me, it had matured and it had kind of gone a layer deeper, I suppose, and people were kind of using it in tangible products, and it was kind of a little bit less gimmicky than maybe the year before. I heard that something like 80% of RFPs were wanting something to do with AI or Gen AI, and only maybe 5-10% of those actually manifested into something. And when they did, the majority of those were chatbots, and that was kind of it. So what's the kind of primary AI use case from the Accedo customer point of view?
Well, that's a different question. I think let me first ask what's the primary use case from an Accedo point of view. Where is the efficiency from our side? And there are two areas which we're very excited about, and then there are a few internal areas, but they're less exciting, right? So if we can improve our HR processes, but from a sort of our core business is primarily related to software engineering, and of course to embrace AI when we do software development, will increase speed, increase efficiency, just a simple matter of sort of creating sort of automatic test cases to improve quality, or at least lower the cost of doing QA, is something that we're embracing. But also in the earlier, and this is the second part of that, what we're doing, in the earlier stage of the process when we're doing prototyping with customers. Typically the customers don't know exactly what they want. You need to prototype and demo and so on. And the way you can use AI to speed up the prototyping, showing the customers more examples of UX designs and what they can achieve would help us to go in the right direction once we start implementing or start designing in earnest. So it does improve those aspects of our work, which is not, of course, seen from the consumer's point of view, but speed up the processes and ultimately lower the cost. I do think if you're looking at from the consumer's perspective, our customers, I think it is actually in the interaction with the service that it has the first immediate use cases. So again, your chatbots, which I assume will in many cases move over to be more of an interactive, sort of more of a verbal interactive, more like a verbal chatbot, if you will, which could be customer support centric, but more likely, and this is again tying back to the jump case, this is where they are, right? So to have a discovery chatbot, if you will, where you can sort of have a conversational aspect, someone who would actually learn about your user preferences, who you can have a conversation with regarding what you want to watch, and get recommendations in a more natural language type of way. I think that's where we will see the initial innovation. I think those will be rolled out very widely over the next couple of years. I think it's a relatively easily understood use case from consumers, and I think it's relatively easily implemented as well.
All right, I think with all those buzzwords, that's probably a good place to wrap up. So yeah, thank you, Michael. That's all we got time for, and hopefully next time we chat, you'll be making sort of Accenture level $64 billion a year revenues. So
yeah, I'll buy you dinner once we have reached that level.
Look forward to it.
Right.
So on a final note, I will be at Streaming Media New York next week. If anyone wants to find me, where can our listeners find you or the Accedo team in the world in the coming weeks?
Yeah, I would recommend that you watch our website and our LinkedIn profile, where you can find sort of the upcoming events. But we would be on most of the events that are around the world. We may not have a formal booth, but we will certainly have representatives of those trade shows. And at RBC, of course, I will be there.
Of course. All right. Great. Thanks again, Michael. Take care. See you at dinner.
Thanks, Tommy.
That's all for the interviews. Thank you so much for listening. Super fun convo. Really enjoyed hearing them hash a couple things out. Also really neat to just hear them reflect on the industry over the last 20 years. A big thank you to Tommy Flanagan and Faultline for sharing the episode with us. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions about the episode or you'd like to reach out, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn or send us an email at playback.podcast@accedo.tv. That's all for this episode. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.